Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Look at all you beautiful people. Thank you so much for coming out to PechaKucha Night, Volume 37. Woo. Now, we always kind of like to start these evenings off with getting a show of hands for folks that this is their first time to PechaKucha. Okay. Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. So we're hitting a new audience. All right. Well, welcome. Yeah, I'm generally this weird all the time. Yeah, that's great. So, for your benefit, we're going to quickly explain exactly what these events are. We are using the pronunciation PechaKucha tonight, but next time we may be calling it PechaKucha, Pikachu. Wait. Just if you want to be with the in crowd, you just say PKN. So where did PKN start? Well, it was devised in 2003 by an American architecture firm that was operating out of Tokyo. The firm Klein Dytham. That's Astrid Klein on the left and Mark Dytham on the right. I feel a little bit that photo. They kind of look like maybe an 80s band that's like angling for a new debut. Anyway, so Klein Dytham. Yeah. So what happened was they had colleagues that were pretty long-winded with their slideshows, and so they were getting frustrated. They felt like that, they were watching these criminally long slideshows that featured images like this and this. So they said, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better. And there was. What they needed to do was add rules. So what we end up now with is PechaKucha Night. And PechaKucha Night is a format, basically, where each presenter gets 20 slides. Now, somebody who's creative can still take 20 slides and squeeze an hour out of that. But we now have a timed, automated time system. So every slide progresses automatically after 20 seconds. So that's where we get the 20 by 20. And so each presentation lasts about 6 minutes, 40 seconds. And, if it goes off the rails, it's 6 minutes and 40 seconds. So the name PechaKucha comes from Japanese for chit chat. And right now there are PechaKucha Nights in over 1,300 communities in America, or in the world. And PechaKucha Burlington, we've been doing, this is volume 37, so it's our 37th edition. We've been doing this since 2010, and we've had 352 presentations, unique presentations by Vermonters. Well, I say actually about 351 by Vermonters. There was this one fella who thought he was a pirate. He came up from New Hampshire, and he did a presentation a couple years ago. But yeah, we'll include him. He's weird, and Vermont's pretty weird. So now, what makes PechaKucha Night so magical? Well, what makes it so magical is really you, because you are not only the audience, you are also the presenter. You're sitting amongst the presenters. They're in the audience with you. And you come out and you support them, you support your friends, your family members, and total strangers as they get up here and share their story, share their passion, and you give them the support, and it's a lively night. It's a magical night. And so thank you for coming out tonight and helping support all of our presenters. And thank you to all our presenters for coming out here and providing you with some entertainment. Yeah. So, June, I didn't mean to push that quickly. Right? Door prizes? Okay. So, speaking of inclusion, and then, there! All right. At PechaKucha Night, we proudly support the many beautiful ways in which we are free to love, to identify, and to express ourselves. Our forum will always provide a safe space for everyone to celebrate their diversity, their stories, and their passions, not just during the month of June, but always. I also want to, and speaking of celebrations, I also want to acknowledge that this Wednesday, Juneteenth, but if you're marking your calendars, mark this Saturday down, because from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m., there's going to be all sorts of Juneteenth celebrations happening in downtown Burlington. So it's going to be a wonderful time, and we also want to acknowledge and recognize the importance of this day. Okay, before we begin, I want to acknowledge our sponsors. Mascoma Bank. Mascoma Bank has been our lead sponsor since 2018. This year they're celebrating their 125th anniversary. They are a certified B corporation. Over the last 5 years, they have given over $1 million to 150 nonprofit organizations just like PechaKucha here in Chittenden County alone. So, I'm also going to recognize our ongoing support that we receive from the Media Factory. You'll see the cameras here. This gets filmed. Every event gets filmed, and then they put them up on their website. They've been doing this for us since almost the very beginning. Solidarity of Unbridled Labor, the design juggernaut here in Burlington, helps us out in many, many ways. They've been a supporter for us for many years and help actually redefine what PechaKucha could be in Burlington. And then, of course, 7 days. 7 days is invaluable asset to the arts community here in Burlington, and they've been supporting us since 2010. Okay, you guys ready? Okay, so we have an awesome lineup tonight. We have 10 presenters. And the way that we do this is that we do 5 presentations, and then we take a little break, 10-15-minute intermission, and then we come back with the second half with another 5 presenters. So without further ado, I think we should get started, yeah? Okay. Our first presenter this evening, and I'll give this one a little extra applause because it's never fun being the first. But I want you to welcome to the stage Jordan Douglas, and the title of his presentation, Artistic Inheritance, Father and Son.
Early in 2001, my sister Stephanie and I moved my father to a nursing home as he was declining with dementia. We were faced with having to clear out and sell his house and studio of 54 years to pay for his care. He had become a hoarder, and within the clutter of his old brick cottage was a lifetime of art. After we secured the outer layer of art, the visible work, we dug in to find countless boxes and stacks of drawings and paintings. Deep in the recesses of his dank basement, we found the portraits he had long talked about. Stephen Douglas had early success as an illustrator on Broadway. Fresh out of the High School of Music and Art in Manhattan in 1954, he changed his name from Cohen and worked with nearly all the important actors of his era. Now, for the first time, we could see these stylized caricatures with signatures from the celebrities. In a 1955 modern screen feature about Marilyn Monroe, she is at the Actors Studio, sitting with Eli Wallach, Ben Gazzara, and on the left, my father, who was only 18. After a couple of years of traveling to Europe and Puerto Rico, where his work became increasingly realistic. He enrolled at the Art Students League to study oil painting and traditional techniques. He had minor exhibitions and worked on commission. In 1963, he attended a lecture by an Indian guru and was inspired to give up his drive for material success. He became a vegetarian. He meditated. He married my mom, who was a Holocaust survivor, and they moved to Westchester to be closer to nature and raise a family. Here we are, next to the old house in Yorktown in 1970. That's me looking up at my younger brother, Gavin. Away from the lights of the city, my father taught classes from home and at various art centers in the region, and he drew and painted voraciously. To me, his watercolors are the most exciting, for they reveal his dance on the tightrope between control and risk. My father was a difficult figure, but he was a gifted teacher. When I was a child, he taught me how to use pencils and paint, but most importantly, he taught me the language of art. He showed me to study shadows to understand dimension, and to look at the big picture before getting caught in the details. Lessons that have stayed with me throughout my career as an artist and teacher. He continued to make art into his 80s, although his life had become dysfunctional. And now, I have the responsibility of managing his legacy. There are over 1,000 pieces of work, and much of it is in need of restoration. In time, I hope to bring his art to a larger audience. It took a year during the pandemic to empty and sell the house, which had been a touchstone in my life. For my process of letting go, I needed to access my creativity. With each visit, I photographed with black and white film to capture the steady undoing of my father's world. Images I call 950 Starlight Road. As we sifted through pile after pile of dadtritis, I collected objects that spoke of the eccentric artist. Back in Vermont, I photographed these items over a light box as a way of remembering. As I assessed the contact sheets, I noticed how the objects were communicating with each other. I scanned the sheets so that I could digitally crop them into smaller grids. For the first 10 rolls, the relationships across frames and rows were unplanned, and then I began to arrange the sequences with more intention. My contact grids were first exhibited at Burlington's new art studio last year, and recently at the Panopticon Gallery in Boston. This is my lovely sister Stephanie. Stephen Douglas died last June, and on the eve of carrying his ashes to Cape Cod to scatter them into the dunes and waves, I got inspired to photograph his mortal remains. I opened an old Chinese tea tin he had kept in his kitchen and poured out his cremated ashes over photographs. An image from 2008 of his hands holding soil in his backyard. My father, the artist, as a baby, gazes from beneath the dust of his own body.
what a lovely way to start off our evening. Thank you. Our next presenter this evening, Julia Devine. The title of her presentation, Going to the Moon in a Black Box Theater. Julia.
All right, I'm ready to launch. I got my space pants on. So over a year ago, when I heard that we would be in the path of totality for an eclipse, I did what any rational person would do. I decided I would create an original outer space show to herald its arrival. And the show would be called This Is How We Walk on the Moon by an Arthur Russell song that I liked. And the set would be this climbing dome from my backyard. This is me convincing our technical director, I have a set, we just have to move it from my backyard to the black box. And that's what we did. We put it on a truck and we brought it right into the theater. What's really interesting when you're creating a piece from scratch is if you have something really tangible to start with, like an object. So in my case, it was a really large object. So when approaching potential collaborators, all I had to say was, hey, I'm creating this outer space show and I've got this dome. Turns out it brings out some really interesting people out of the woodwork. It became like that, the dome became like that cardboard box you played with as a child. You could do so many things with it. It was rather exciting. What if you climbed on top of the dome and it's a hill and we're looking at stars, or we watch an eclipse, or we go inside the dome and it's a spaceship. Turns out I had a student who was a theater and robotics major who really wanted to project onto shapes. And I said, boy, do I have a project for you. I've got this dome. So he and I worked together to figure out, well, how we're going to project on this. So we painted the dome a grayish white so we could project onto it, and we created this custom-built dome cover that we could take on and off. And then in addition to being a projection surface, what if it could become this huge skirt that a celestial being pops out of and then sings a song? The possibilities were endless. It was so much fun. And I needed to find a group of players who wanted to just play with the dome. And I did. And these individuals had really unique connections to outer space, and they were also really interested in exploring microgravity. And one of them, at my audition, actually scaled the wall of the Black Box Theater. Unfortunately, I couldn't include that in the show. I assembled a creative team of technicians and designers. I had a sound designer that composed original space music, a stage manager who documented our whole process, and our lighting designer and projectionist who used 3 different projectors to 3D map the surface of the dome. I don't know if you've heard of these stages of the creative process, but it goes like something like this. You probably have. It goes, this is awesome, this is tricky, this is crap, I am crap, this might be okay, this is awesome. So this was the this is tricky stage here. Oftentimes when I was stumped, I would literally hug the dome. We eventually came up with a loose map of the show, and this is how it went. We come from the universe, we look at the stars, we have a personal connection to space, we become astronauts, we go to the moon, we reach another galaxy, and then we're absorbed back into the universe. And this is our stargazing scene right here. And then a nice moment in the show is when each performer shares a personal story. And one of our performers also happened to be an illustrator. So we filmed him doing watercolor illustrations of each person's story, and then we projected it and sped up each illustration. It was a really touching moment in the piece. We were very inspired by NASA's Artemis mission, and so we created our own mission. We were Mission Andromeda, and we complete with our own logo. We had a pilot, a commander, and mission and payload specialists. We really actually started to believe that we were going to the moon. Even though we were painting recycled wine box inserts silver, or covering recycled tubes and foil, and figuring out how do we attach this to the dome so it's like a lunar lander. We really believed that we were going to go to the moon. Throughout the piece, we also projected clips from Méliès's Trip to the Moon from 1902. And what we didn't realize at the time was that our own piece started to mirror Méliès's early cinema. We too were trying to go to the moon using handmade set pieces and costumes, and patterns started to emerge that we didn't realize. Well, we did make liftoff. We figured out a way to lift the dome off the ground. We had lights and sound and fog. And even though the dome just, lifted off of the floor and went to the ceiling, I can't tell you how exciting it is to watch a large object be lifted up. It was like we were actually lifting off into space. And then to watch the object slowly come back down to the surface of the stage. It was so exciting, like we had landed on the moon. We put new flags on the moon. We explored the moon's surface and microgravity before encountering space garbage. And we entered into our own space gate sequence, a la 2001 Space Odyssey, where we made it to the Andromeda Galaxy. And we encountered aliens and moving celestial beings, and of course the galaxy themselves. And of course it was a campy song and dance number, because every theater piece needs a musical number. And it was called Andromeda, So Spectacular. We also did stage a total eclipse before actually seeing the eclipse. Our production's run was before the eclipse, and none of us had ever seen a total eclipse before. And of course we used Annie Dillard's essay, Total Eclipse, as our inspiration, and turns out we got pretty close. We even had a moon that moved with feet as it went and covered the sun. Later on in the process, we came up with something fun for early on. We projected images from the Webb telescope, but I had this idea, like, what if all we see are like feet coming out of the dome at first? And it didn't make any sense, but it did make sense, and it was so unique. And then we created an ancient space language, which we taped to the floor using spike tape. It was an out-of-this-world adventure. It was really a relief to leave Earth for a while, and after a theater piece is over, it can be sad. It's gone forever, like a mandala. The dome is now in our backyard, awaiting its next adventure. It's a new color, and I wish all of you find your dome of inspiration, play, and creativity.
Thank you so much, Julia. What a wonderful presentation. Thank you. Our next presenter this evening, coming up, Brian Collier, Unlawning America. Brian.
Hi everybody, I'm here today to talk about a project I've been working on since 2017 called Unlawning America. This project builds upon work I've been doing since about 2005, and the central idea is to get people to transform lawn that they don't use for recreation into pollinator habitat. For more than 25 years, I've been making these kind of interdisciplinary art projects examining the ecological impacts of human activity. And my goal with this work is to help people notice the undomesticated plants and animals we encounter every day. The goal is to promote an increased sense of connection to the nearby natural world. Around 80% of all animals on Earth are insects. A study came out in 2017 showing a decline of 75% of flying insects over 3 decades in 60 protected natural areas in Germany. This was followed by a bunch of other studies that were showing similar declines all around the planet. Of course, this is tremendously disturbing, and there are numerous causes, a lot beyond a quick fix, but there's one thing, habitat loss, that we actually can do something about if we rethink how we manage the green space around where we live and work. We can create beneficial habitat for insects and a lot of other species. By simply not mowing the lawns that aren't used for play space or sports, we can reduce carbon emissions, reduce the amount of chemicals going into our earth and water, use less water, and most importantly, create habitat for insects and a whole range of other animals. Lawn is one of the largest irrigated crops in the US, taking up more than 40 million acres of land. This irrigation in most places takes 30 to 60% of all fresh water, mainly in urban and suburban areas, despite the fact that lawn doesn't contribute anything to our food or energy needs. Currently, most lawn is mowed about once every week or two with gas-powered mowers. The EPA estimates that around 800 million gallons of gas are used each year just for mowing. A significant percentage of that is spilled on the ground, creating a lot of pollution problems. So the air pollution from mowing with a gas-powered mower for 1 hour is equivalent to driving 11 vehicles for the same amount of time. Lawn is described by most ecologists as an ecological desert. This means that it really doesn't contribute anything to the plants and animals that live in or around it. Its maintenance contributes 67 million pounds of pesticides and 47 million pounds of herbicides to the environment each year. So I want you to imagine the reduction in carbon emissions if we cut mower use by half or more. Imagine the immediate ecological benefits of just half those 40 million acres being transformed into pollinator-friendly meadows. So try to picture yourself walking through a path cut through a pollinator meadow buzzing with life, rather than across a green dead carpet. So why do we have lawns? Most Americans are conditioned, hang on, are conditioned to want a lawn, and many believe that it's an essential component for the landscapes of our home and workplaces. This cultural tradition can be traced back to English and French manners, where lawn was a display of wealth. It only started appearing in the US after the Civil War, and it exploded after World War II with these housing developments. Because few think about this history, many blindly accept the lawn as an essential component of American identity. So this project challenges these deeply seated perceptions, reminding us that they come from misdirected traditions and questionable beliefs. Unlawning America makes the practice of keeping a lawn more visible and less ordinary, and I celebrate unmediated green space and model alternatives to lawn. Perhaps more importantly, the project frames unmowed meadows, which many see as messy and undesirable, as ecologically and aesthetically valuable. Since keeping a lawn is actually a cultural practice, I utilize art, design, and other cultural strategies to promote the beauty of a diverse meadow. I use the Dürer painting called A Great Piece of Turf for the project logo to tie it to art being created around the North American colonization period. Because this kind of cultural change is hard, I've developed strategies people can use to deflect neighbors who might prefer to see everything mowed. Using these strategies can also help shift the cultural current where the weirdo in the neighborhood is the one who doesn't mow the lawn, to the weirdo in the neighborhood is the one who does. Some strategies I found particularly helpful are pictured here, mowing shaped borders around your no-mow area, mowing a path through the middle of the meadow, using some kind of fencing or bordering to delineate it, and then finding plants that grow out of it and sort of grouping them, digging them up and grouping them together to make it look more like a cultivated garden. Signage is really important to deflect neighbors that might be a little bit upset about what you're doing. This is the sign I designed for the project. Pictured here is Shelburne Farms, which was one of the launch locations of this project. I use a bunch of different visual art in this project. I also created these unlawning kits that includes one of the signs. It includes flags to mark the edges. It includes biodiversity enhancement discs with seed balls embedded with native plant seeds to increase native biodiversity at the site. Of course, there's no need to use my kits, there's no need to use my signs, there's no need to identify no mowing with my project at all. Just stop mowing or less and see what happens. So in all the years I've been doing this, I'm amazed at the resilience of the natural world, the diversity that is often hidden in a mowed lawn, and the speed at which plants and animals recolonize places once we leave them alone. So there's often a concern about weeds and pests, and I just want to point out that when we find plants or animals in these wrong places, we label them as weeds and pests. In their right places, they have an ecological function, right? So it's just because we decided that they're in the wrong place. It's important to realize they provide ecological function, and bringing an increased awareness to that is, especially in these novel ecosystems of the built environment, is really important. So things like early emerging bees and dandelions that grow in lawns, they become a really important component of the ecological profile of these novel ecosystems of our lawn. So I'll ask you as my final thing, how much lawn do you need? I would argue much less than we got. Thank you.
was awesome. Thank you, Brian. Our next presenter this evening, Genevieve Jacobs, and the title of her talk, Sailing a Teacup Across the South Pacific.
Is it okay if I turn my head to see the screen? Oh. Thank you. All right, good. That will be very helpful. All right. Welcome. Thank you so much for letting me share a little bit of my somewhat improbable, but evidently not impossible life with you. Yes. Thank you. I was rowing past this boat when I was in Anchorage on my own boat in Miami, and struck up a conversation with the man in the companionway. His name is Claude. He had built the boat in Montreal in his parents' garage. That's why it's 18 feet long. You know, every garage you've ever seen. And I had said, oh, you did a good solid job here. And he said in French, trop fort, jamais manque, which means too strong, never miss. And I said, well, a few improvements and you could take this boat anywhere. And he was very insulted. And that began 5 years of us working together on the boat and taking off from Miami. That's the night before we sailed out in 1983. And there's the boat beyond us. We're sitting on my parents' boat. That's kind of a pretty picture of the boat under sail. And, it was a voyage that each of us, not knowing each other, had dreamed of from the age of 12, 13, 14. So those of you who have young ones, listen to them when they say they want to do something at 13 or 14. It could be happening, you know. I was very discouraged by my family, but I did it anyway. So here we are. This is the first leg of the voyage, which itself was 3 years, but it was 2 years in Miami getting the boat ready. Tea must have tea. And I used to joke that the boat was a teacup. As if functionally, that was my teacup. And it was my cup of tea, too. And you see I have some Greek paradigms in the background. I was studying ancient Greek. As you can see, it's very cozy. We had a little stove, which we rarely needed to use in the South Pacific, but you never know. Sometimes you get blown off course. You might get cold. The original plan was we were going to sail northern waters, but we took the trade wind route, and here I am waiting for laundry to dry. You do all the laundry in a bucket. Put it on deck, hope it doesn't blow away, try to fasten it. And I'm wearing a life line I had fashioned from pieces of line in a figure 8. This is a sextant being very masterfully handled by my husband, Claude. We are a vanishing breed. Many of you remember the days before there were any satellites in the air or in the sky. And here's the cat, Alexandre, who did the whole trip with us, along with his mother, Tulip. He's looking in the sextant because he knows this is a terribly valuable, this is the most valuable thing on the boat, the sextant. So he's trying to see what is in that ocular that we find so entrancing that we pull it out of its velvet box every day, you know, to take a meridian noon sight. We get through Panama, and 21 days across the rime of the ancient mariner, dead calms, water spouts, sudden squalls. It was incredible. Words fail me. Here you see the best I could do under the circumstances at getting a picture of a good sea. You cannot imagine the massive power of waves of the ocean. And they don't come through on a photograph. But anyway, you could see the cats were impressed, right? And they were cool cats, man. Took a lot to impress them. They had both been born on board and never lived ashore. So here's a Galapagos Islands to the Marquesas, was 3,000 some miles nautical. The closest land was straight down. And you can see we're making some speed here. I hope that feeling comes through. I raised the headsails and the anchor in the Galapagos and just went. And we actually were able to, I believe, perhaps we still hold a record for a micro yacht going that fast in 26 days. So we made almost 150 miles over the ground a day, which was incredible for such a small boat. Strong, trop fort, jamais manque. This is our deck looking from above. You can see it was quite comfortable. It had a solar panel. We had our Navic self-steering gear, which was like a third member of the family. A little bubble bool that you use to check the weather when you don't want to go outside. And here's me and the mother cat, Toodlet. And what Robert Louis Stevenson called his Pacific voyage, the unforgettable, the unrememberable. You're in a different state of mind. Time disappears, time takes on a different dimension. Here again, I'm trying to capture for you the massive power of the ocean, but it just looks a little bumpy, that's all. But believe me, when you're in the boat, it's like being a bug in a drum. You just get shaken up all the time and hurled around. So it's physically demanding, mentally challenging, and emotionally incredibly opening, consciousness raising, I suppose. We spent a year working in Tahiti, a year working in Noumea, New Caledonia, which was then in civil war and is now again, and then Australia for a year. And then I discovered I was pregnant, and here's a poem for you, Everything Changed. Oceans, Juan Ramon Jimenez. I have a feeling that my boat has struck down there in the depths against a great thing, and nothing happens, nothing. Silence. Or is it all just beginning? Thank you.
So thank you, Genevieve. Thank you for sharing this amazing journey, your travels. So we're at our fifth presenter. After this presenter, we'll have a little break, but don't go anywhere yet because Seth Neary is coming up with his presentation, Inspired.
So inspiration comes when you least expect it. December 3rd, 2019 was an important date for me. It was my deceased mother's birthday. It was the day I started immunotherapy after 16 rounds of chemotherapy, and it was the day I received my issue of Monster Children magazine. Now, Monster Children magazine, the creator here was Chris Ashworth, was the graphic designer, a great graphic designer. And what I really liked about this magazine was the layers and the textures and the typography and the play on words. And the article, Chris is also speaking about letraset, something that I was unfamiliar with at the time. I Googled it, I started to learn about it, and I looked on eBay, and it was like $10 a sheet, and I wasn't interested in purchasing it because I wasn't sure if it was going to work. But I found these 5 cabinet drawers, and I bought one for $75, and there was over 100 sheets of letraset in it, so now I was in. Another thing that Chris had spoke about was finding typography out in the wild, something that wasn't created on a computer, something that was distressed, something that was destructed, and that spoke to me, and I really like that aesthetic. So my journey of capturing
distressed and destructed type began. I would take walks around anywhere from 5 to 12 miles a day looking for distressed type all over Burlington. And a lot of this was from the train yards. I would go to construction sites. I was looking for sans serif typography, stuff that was like Helvetica or Universe, or and here's a lot more of it. And I have a lot of photography of this, but it was really fun. It was a really great journey. I was posting a lot of these on my Instagram and getting a lot of feedback on this, and it was something that I really enjoyed. The next thing was I was starting to study another great graphic designer, David Carson. And David Carson was producing a lot of collage work. My kids came home from Canada from a Vans sneaker store, and they had this bag, and it was the first collage I put together. I was just ripping it up, taping it down, incorporating letter-set, which then led into taking a photograph of my daughter who was playing bass, and I thought it would be a great, why don't we make an album cover? So I shot this with a Polaroid, deconstructed the Polaroid, and then added letter-set to it, and she had her first album cover. Yeah, she was a great sport. This also turned into more experimental collage work and incorporating letter-set, just working with different textures, and everything was a whip, a work in progress. I would post these on my Instagram again, and I ended up producing well over 200. A good friend of mine, Greg Waters in New York City, called me up and he said he saw what I was producing on Instagram, and he invited me to create a graphic for the Harold Hunter Foundation. I called a good friend, Gunnars, who had photography of Harold. We created this board. It was all done by hand, no computers. Yeah. My next journey took me back to my parents' house, where I went through my archive of magazines, and I was looking for specifically ray gun magazines, which both Chris Ashworth and David Carson were the creative directors at different times. So I found these magazines. All the mastheads were created with letter-set, and a lot of the stuff in the magazines was created with letter-set, so it was speaking my language. The last magazine I found was this magazine, a snowboard magazine called Stick, in my collection. I looked at the publication, and sure enough, it was created by Ray Gun Magazine, and the art director was another guy, Scott Klum, who I was a big fan of that I'd never met. And ironically, I was featured in the Airwalk ad and a snowboard ad on the back cover. The very next day, I was up at Sugarbush, and I saw a Morrow snowboard from 1990 on the rack, and it had the original bindings. This board was created by Scott Klum, the art director from the magazine. I took a photo of it, I posted it on my Instagram story, I tried to do some type like they might in Ray Gun. I tagged him. Oh, I gotta get to this. I was driving down Pine Street and I saw David Carson. I pulled over, I picked him up in my truck, and I drove him downtown, and we became friends, and I gave him a box of letter-set. There's more to that story. Carson's a legendary graphic designer. 46 Pages magazine. This was a publication out of Croatia that I became friends with this big community on Instagram, and it was all like-minded, grungy designers, and they invited me to art direct one of the issues, and of course I did the 46 pages in letter-set. This is some of the type that I was playing with at my house, and this is Compacta. I was cutting it up, taping it, scanning it back in, and I would make pages that were going into the issue. The next, this is that awkward part. The next thing was really experimenting again with collage work. I was really interested in another graphic designer, Andy Jenkins out of California, and he's best known for working in the collage medium. So his collages really inspired me. This is a pretty big piece that I have at the house that I worked on. It was just finding scraps around my house. I worked with a Swiss snowboard producer, a guy who makes beautiful snowboards, and we built this snowboard together, and we were able to incorporate the collage work that was as a graphic, and it's a beautiful board, and it's a really fun one to ride. Mm-hmm. This is my house at my sanctuary at my house. I've since discovered how to find Letraset, which is purchasing the cabinets, and they're all full. It's a place where I like to go and just kind of tune out and really work with my hands and get off the computer. So the last thing, which is, inspiration is the process of being mentally stimulated to do something, especially to do something creative. Thank you.
I think we found our next logo. That was awesome. We're going to take a brief intermission. Before we go, though, I just want to say, like, where else can you go in the course of 35 minutes, be inspired, be touched, learn something, be challenged, have your creative batteries recharged? What an awesome start. Thank you all. All right. You guys are a very obedient audience. You're like very well behaved. Thank you. Are you guys ready to start the second half? All right. Kicking off our second half for PechaKucha Night Volume 37. John Killacky, Scenes from the AIDS War.
In 1979, friends began to get sick. In 1981, the New York Times warned of a rare gay cancer in 41 homosexuals. By 1993, my entire generation of gay men were dying of AIDS. Here are stills and excerpts from some of my pandemic videos. At first, people died alone. Even medical staff would leave food outside the hospital rooms, afraid to come in. Community care circles, vigils through the night, and writing libretti for memorial services. In 1993, I was back in New York and went to see the AIDS film Philadelphia. Afterwards, I walked from the Upper East Side to Greenwich Village, where I was staying. It was a Sunday morning. The streets were empty and haunted. I passed 62nd and 2nd, where I used to listen to Bill about his plummeting T-cell counts. Further down on Lexington Avenue, I passed where Gary lived. He moved to Florida after his partner died. I never did get to say goodbye. Crossing over the west side was Manhattan Plaza. Kevin moved there after Don died. And then on 24th and 9th, I passed Vito's apartment. We often gossiped how angry he'd be if he was still alive, about how little has changed in the Hollywood closet. A few blocks further downtown, I was in the Village. Here in every block, I looked up and saw shadows of those taken far too soon. Images of my lost ones surrounded me. I tried hard to hold on to some of my stolen shadows. Charlie would call in the middle of the night, screaming through his dementia, begging for us to get him out of the hospital, away from his real and imagined demons. I never did visit him. I was too ashamed. He never came home again. I held Peter, trying to warm his shivering body, hoping that somehow I could heal him, at least for a while, so he could sleep. Both of us were drenched in his night sweats. Months later, I dreamt of him and called. Peter died that morning. I telephoned my running friend Lee. I just returned from a trip and wanted to establish contact. His sister answered the phone, thanked me for calling, and asked if I had anything to share for those gathered at the memorial service. When the news came ending Kevin's death watch, I was relieved. I wouldn't have to call the hospital anymore. In his last days, with morphine obliterating all feeling, I would be told his condition was satisfactory. Satisfactory. Margie crawled into Christopher's deathbed. As his spirit began to leave, instead of releasing, his body contracted, as only a dancer's could, and tightly embraced her. She held on, knowing his work was done, and hers only begun. After his troupe's performance, Reza was exhausted, shivering under blankets. Startled by his skeletal shell, I held him closely, knowing it was the last time I would see him. I told him I loved him. He whispered, "I love you too." Backstage, David was feverish. I let him know it was okay to cancel, but he said, "I came here to witness." Soon afterward, he was dead. I still imagine what his legacy might have been, along with Keith, Ron, Huck, Marlon. From the Kirov stage in St. Petersburg, I learned Rudolph died that morning. They said from a heart attack. No mention of AIDS. His name was evoked again in a performance in Tel Aviv, alongside Jean, Arnie, Dominique, Jorge, Tom. I hold on to my dead. They have become the elements in my reality. I hear Celie's fluid-filled lungs gurgling as her family healed itself, gathering around her wasted, transgendered body. Her quick, shallow breaths are wind in my universe. Peter's night sweats become water, entwined in fevers, chills, and sweat. I kissed his cracked lips and held him forever that night. He kept apologizing as he cried. I wept too, but my tears were filled with rage. My fire resides in Bill's fever-ridden body on the ice mattress. It was too early to name the disease, so he lay there, an anomaly for the medical students to ponder. I'd nap with him on the frozen bed. No, I'm not cold. I'm with my friend. David's ashes are my earth. Defiled at death, his family cremated him before an autopsy could reveal how his lesion-filled organs functioned for so long. I smear his ashes, warrior-like on my body, and scream into the night. My dead, they are my mandala. Telling their unfinished stories affirms my life. I still cry for the devastation among us. Heroes, all of them needlessly lost. I am blessed to have been loved by angels. For all that have gone before, and for those of us that remain, may there be passionate, unforgiven fire.
Bravo! Unforgettable. Our next presenter, and this is the thing about PechaKucha, is sometimes you're not quite sure what's going to follow what, but let's give Lauren J. Zito a very warm welcome for her presentation. My best camera was my worst. Lauren.
we're ready. I spent 25 years in Pittsburgh, and I want to talk about wandering through Pittsburgh during the COVID-19 pandemic. And yes, a lot of people dyed their hair pink in the pandemic, and I was definitely one of them. So I started exploring the quiet streets of Pittsburgh. I don't know if anyone's been to Pittsburgh, but yes, oh, thank you. It's very hilly. Lots of stairs, many, many, many stairs. Stairs, and I'm not going to be as quick as possible on this one. Stairs were the main source of transportation for the lower and middle class, from their houses on the hill to the factories below. So I wandered these streets, and I had a very broken phone, and it was the pandemic at that time, and it was, well, I would say the summer of 2020 into 2021. Very cheap phone, but I loved it because it was cracked on the front, cracked on the back, the pressure was off, and I was wandering these streets, and on a side note, I was on a very, very, very long distance relationship with my partner, and we would often go on these tandem walks. He would go on his and I would go on mine, and we would walk in tandem and share images and texts of what we saw. And so this was done with my very cheap, sorry, Samsung phone that was broken half the time. And I was pulled in by color and light and the decay of Pittsburgh. And also a lot of us were working from home during that time. So the times I had time to walk was in the late afternoon and early evening. And the light was so low. And the interesting thing about Pittsburgh is that things didn't necessarily get torn down. And things had a decay to them. So I was pulled in by different shapes and colors. I had this phone that was really awful, but I was able to put color together and juxtapose color and shapes and form. And changing up my point of view. Pittsburgh is green. Pittsburgh is very green if you've never been there. And the thing with Pittsburgh is that there's all these neighborhoods. Things get well, don't always get torn down, but they go through this decay, and the green overtakes it. Some things are around, are left for a very long time, days, months, years. Some things are hidden, and especially walking during the pandemic time was my time to kind of think and look and start looking, and there was secret worlds behind things. Some things were definitely abandoned, some things were not, but through my walking, and I had particular routes that I would go, but I would spend through walking, I was able to see a lot of weird, very quirky neighborhoods. If you've never been to Pittsburgh, you've got to go to Pittsburgh. And just because something was closed off didn't mean there wasn't any activity in them, which was really interesting. So and not a lot of people during this time. People were closed up, either working or especially in the city. So I had the city to myself, which was really sort of spectacular. So I would spend time looking at things out of context, pulling color, getting close up on objects as much as my poor little phone would let me. And that's actually a spring that was a natural spring in the side in one of these neighborhoods, and people would drink from them. Pittsburgh, even if something gets torn down, we still feel the shadow of it. And that's the lovely thing about Pittsburgh, is that you can still sort of see it, still sort of see things. Things don't get raised and, like a Dunkin' Donuts gets put there. It just sort of exists. And I found with this camera I was very loose with it. It didn't have a lot of settings, and it kind of was what it was. And I found that some of my best shots were ones I called shooting from the hip. I couldn't tell what I was shooting, and I was just sort of feeling it. One downside of Pittsburgh is that Pittsburgh was and still is a walking city, but cars came, and many of the neighborhoods got violently and but beautifully divided for highways and cars. So you get these kind of no man's zone. I mentioned before about how Pittsburgh has kind of a secret world. You'll have these neighborhoods where these buildings, and is it empty? Is it not empty? I'm not sure. Sometimes I've seen these doors open and there's a hub of activity, but it's secret and there's no signs. But yet sometimes there are signs. One thing I found was lovely with Pittsburgh is that because things don't get really thrown out, you kind of can look back in time and you can see different times and things got changed and reworked and reused for different things. Sometimes you knew what they were for, sometimes it sort of made sense, and sometimes it didn't make sense. But there was this definite urban decay, sort of walking through Pittsburgh, spending some time really looking and walking, not driving through various places, but walking and pausing, kind of walk through. I haven't been to Pittsburgh in some time, but one thing I really miss about Pittsburgh is what is over that next hill, or what is behind this building? Is it abandoned? Is it not abandoned? It's sort of mysterious. What was it used for 5 different times over? But for me, it's walking through Pittsburgh, having this camera that kind of didn't work, which I still have, and it's all smashed up and it kind of doesn't work. But I was able to, it was perfect for this pandemic, perfect for me, and it's and I'm ready to go with no matter what I got in my pocket.
Thank you, Lauren. Our next presenter, David K. Griffin, with his presentation, My Life in the Swamp. David.
I'm ready to go. So, have you ever had a dream that you acted on? Well, I have. I had a dream that I worked for art photographer Clyde Butcher. So I got up in the morning, I drove over to his Venice gallery and studio. Hi, I'm David Griffin. I know this sounds crazy, but I had a dream that I worked here. Hello, do you have an appointment? No, I don't have an appointment, I have a dream. I explained that I was working for Weiland Galleries. I'm an art consultant, I train the gallery staff. I talk about my public art writing experience. I mentioned that I have a background in graphic design, marketing, and that I'm a fine artist. You see, they weren't looking to hire anyone. There were no help wanted signs out. We weren't advertising for a position. I just thought it would be a fun and cool place to work. I knew I had a lot to offer and could help, so, and I knew I could learn a lot from Clyde. It was exciting, and what the heck, what could I lose? So imagine this, I'm standing in the lobby of this business, and I'm telling the receptionist about my Clyde dream. And from the inner office, I could see someone moving closer to the door. It was Jackie, Clyde's daughter and business manager, basically a CEO. She invited me in. After an hour or so of me extolling my virtues, we were looking around the studio trying to decide where my desk would be. I was hired on the spot. 3 days later, I was on the road with Clyde. We were on the road to St. Augustine for an event that he was talking at. So we get to St. Augustine, where we're greeted by the Camera Club organizers. They escort us to our lodging. It's a lovely B&B in an old Victorian home. I lay back up my 4-posted bed and I thought, wow, this is 3 days after my dream. Here I am in St. Augustine. Somebody pinch me. So the next day we get ready for the event. We drive over to the venue, unload. Jackie and I set up the tables. We arrange the easels displaying Clyde's photography, and as I watch from the back of the room, this is on-the-job training. I'm learning as we go. The next event is at Selby Gardens Botanical. Just a week or so after returning from St. Augustine, this was the busy season, so we had things planned week after week. Clyde was in the gallery, had a reception. Jackie and I set the tables again. We greeted fans, and this is a ghost orchid flower that we saw in the last slide. So the next event was an opening at Clyde's Venice Gallery and Studio. I attended a couple of these events in the past and was super impressed. The highlight is his darkroom tours. So we get to My Life in the Swamp. Another open house is in store at the Big Cypress Gallery, surrounded by over 1 million acres of wilderness. This is a magical place. We're greeted by the staff who live and work there, and places like no other I've ever seen. It was amazing, and now I understand where Clyde got all his inspiration from. So it was Valentine's Day in the swamp, and Jackie had planned a party. This would be a great time for me to bond with the staff. A film crew joined the celebration. Over the next few days, we would be filming for an upcoming PBS documentary. After the party, I take a walk around the grounds, and the stars shine like I've never seen before. The following day, I'm treated to a swamp walk. Like President Jimmy Carter and his wife Rosalind, I get to experience the magic of the swamp knee deep. And now, I'm not going to lie, this seemed very sketchy. I was very cautious entering the water, but our guide assured me I would be safe. Now, Clyde, of course, had been trekking through the swamp for years, and he was okay, so I would be too. This is an iconic image of Clyde in the pond next to the gallery. He's got his viewfinder camera, and he likes overcast days with long exposures so that you can see the movement in the photograph. So he first tried to photograph this pond on the Tamiami Trail. He was chased off by a gun-wielding wild man yelling, "Get off my property." Some years later, Clyde and Nikki bought the property, and Clyde was able to photograph the pond. I was soaking up this information as quickly as I could. After all, I was going to be representing Clyde's work. I would need to know all I could. Every photograph has a story. This one was taken while Clyde and Nikki were hiking the grassy plains of the preserve. Grassy plains in a swamp? What are those? Mounds, strands? Oh my, I have a lot to learn. This is one of Clyde's iconic images called Dunes. He photographed this in the Panhandle. He went every day for a week. It was overcast clouds, so he couldn't take the photograph. On the last day, before they were just about to leave, the sun popped out for a brief moment. He was able to get 2 pieces of film of this image. Like I said, this is his most popular one. My adventures continue throughout the season. After the Big Cypress Swamp Walk, we went to Fort Lauderdale for the opening of another gallery event. This is just 3 weeks after my dream. I'm in Fort Lauderdale. Okay, it was our off-season plans. We did all sorts of things for the following season, and I was tasked with designing one of Clyde's National Parks books. So, although Clyde is known as the Ansel Adams of the Everglades, he's also famous for these national parks projects. So, to bring it all home and to show Vermonters and the swamp and the mountains together, I'm presenting some recent designs that I did for Vermont posters. And lastly, here I am on the hammock in the Loose Screw Sanctuary. As I contemplate my good fortune, I am thankful that I literally followed my dream, the one that led me to the Loose Screw Sanctuary, Klein Butcher, and My Life in the Swamp. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Our next presenter, Mariella Torres. And the title of her presentation, Grandfathers and Their Eldest Granddaughter. Mariella.
I stacked the crowd on purpose.
So this is a story about two men who come from completely different backgrounds, different countries, different educational backgrounds. And yet despite all of those differences, they shared a bond that crossed oceans. And that was their love for me, their eldest granddaughter. I was born in 1980, I was conceived in Peru in 1988 and born in Burlington in 1989. So I've always been bridging divides, even from before birth. This is a picture of my lovely mother. Being the eldest granddaughter, I expanded so many people's identities. And it's something that I've really been thinking about recently, is that every single person in this room, by your mere existence, by you just being born, you expanded someone's identity. For me, being the oldest, I gave my mom the mother title. I gave my grandfather the grandfather title. And every single one of you had those ripples as well. My grandfather, Lance Paul Mead, was born in 1934 in New York City. He was an only child, and he moved a couple of times from New York City to Connecticut and then to Burlington, Vermont, where he serendipitously met my grandmother at Burlington High School, which is now the Edmonds School right up the road. He graduated from the University of Vermont with a major in geology, and that is my mom, who was also at graduation, and she is the eldest of 4. Mi abuelo, Mariella Torres, was born in 1924 in Cusco, Peru. He was one of 4 children, and when he was a young boy, his mother wasn't able to afford much for him, and so he was sent to the Andes Mountains to herd sheep for another family. It was tough for him, but he persevered, and he ended up having a family of his own, one of 4 boys, and this is a wonderful picture because there's not a ton of pictures from that time. And so you can see on the far left is my grandfather with my dad in his lap, and the far right is my grandmother with her 3rd child. One of the things that I've also been thinking about is just how big the universe is and how wild these 2 boys coming from completely different backgrounds, the fact that their timelines could merge and the fact that the universe could bring them together in that way, just I don't think that they could have even dreamed that that was possible when they were growing up in New York City and Vermont and Peru. This is one of my favorite photos because the merging of timelines started with my parents. And so I'd like you to take a moment and see if you can spot the Peruvian in this very Vermont. They got married at Blueberry Hill Inn in Vermont. My grandfather loved us in a very adventurous Vermont way. He'd show up at the house uninvited with a canoe on the top of his roof, usually with safety out the window to like my mom's dismay. Luckily I was wearing a life jacket in this. And he would bring us on lots of adventures. He would also forget snacks and hydration and all the other things. But the beautiful thing about having him so close by was we got to experience seasons with him, apple picking being one of them. He was known for his cowboy boots and his very large selection of hats. And I used to love wearing his hats, but pretended that I didn't because I didn't want to let on how much it meant to me. He loved in a very out loud way. He was very emotionally connected, and he was always very present. He would be at every recital. He'd be hiding in bushes, taking photos. He would be at every airport drop-off. Even though we never told him that we were actually leaving or the date and time, he would find ways to figure it out. They have a log cabin in Brandon, Vermont, and it was the epicenter of all of our annual family traditions. We would celebrate birthdays and holidays, and to this day, the furniture remains the same, and so it is this museum of all the memories of my childhood in the hills of Vermont. Mi abuelo, there was a language barrier, but he figured out early on the best way to love us was to feed the picky eaters. And so he would go early in the morning to make sure that we had our favorite tamales, and he would go to battle with my dad at lunches to make sure that we got the glass bottled Coca-Cola, even though we ended up getting lots and lots of cavities because of it. We lived with my grandfather in the summer, and so we spent a lot of time in the back patio playing with the guinea pigs that would then become food, playing with the stray cats that would appear from different rooftops. the chickens, the dogs that they were always adopting. And during the days, we would always go on different adventures. But no matter what we were doing, we would always make sure to come home for lunch. Almuerzo. It was a very important time of the day, and we'd get back and he'd be pacing around, so excited to see us, but also just really excited that we survived the day, because my mom was the one with us for the whole summer, and my dad would come for the last 2 weeks. And it was very visible with the redhead and then the 3 Peruvian children, so we were kind of a target. Thinking about things later on in life, I realized that we spent a lot of time away from the house, and my grandfather would spend time home. But what I realize now, what we were doing is we were grounding in our ancestral knowledge. And it was such a special time. My grandfather came from nothing and worked very hard his whole life, but he achieved his dream. He had a home for us. He provided food, and he provided a summer where we could root into our history and our culture and get closer to him. And a lot of the photos are mantelpiece type photos. We didn't have a lot of the candids. So there was the language barrier. There was also a hearing impairment issue. But he was a very stoic man, and without fail, at the end of every summer, he'd bring us to the airport and he would weep by the fact that we wouldn't see each other maybe for another 2 years. Both of my grandfathers have since passed away, but I carry them with me every single day. Their love gives me courage and gives me so much strength, and I'm so proud and grateful to be their granddaughter.
Thank you for sharing your grandfathers with us, Mariella. So I got some good news and bad news. The bad news is we only got one presentation left. The good news is we still got a presentation left. Benjamin Aleshire is wrapping up our evening with his presentation, Poet for Hire.
Imagine you're sitting by the fountain in Washington Square Park. From the multitude, a beautiful woman approaches and asks you to write her a poem about how the only reason she hasn't killed herself is because her grandmother is so kind she couldn't bear to make her unhappy. She wanders back into the crowd, and now you have 10 minutes to write her this: Why I Didn't Do It. What if it were possible to be so selfless that every day your body shrank in its thin gown until you disappeared? And what if I told you that your slow vanishing act was the only thing keeping me from evaporating all at once, in a flash, drops of water dancing on a hot stove? What she hasn't told you is that she's been planning to kill herself that very night. The poem is just a part of how she's bidding farewell to this world. She reads it, bursts into tears, you kiss her wet face and say her life is just beginning, and then you ask her to marry you, and she says yes, but you live in the back of a vintage warehouse in Bushwick, and she lives in Japan. Technically, we're still engaged. Hi, my name is Benjamin Aleshire, and for most of the previous decade, I made my living this way. Usually I say that I've written somewhere around 10,000 poems for strangers, everywhere from Burlington to Havana, San Francisco to Paris, Berlin to Brattleboro. I also do other stuff, which I think informs who I am as a poet. Instead of going to college, I started touring as a trumpet player with a band called the Vermont Joy Parade in a school bus running off fry grease that was either gifted to us by restaurants or pumped out of their dumpsters in the middle of the night. When I was 18, I worked 60-hour weeks at 3 restaurants simultaneously, and then hitchhiked through Latin America for 6 months with a 35mm camera, which happens to be when I started writing my first readable poems. This portrait was taken in the foothills of a volcano in Guatemala. I suspect I was always destined to become a poet. Since childhood, I've been sallow-eyed and discontented, obsessed with images and words, and had an appetite for experience that borders on reckless. This is me in Cuttingsville, the unincorporated hamlet in southern Vermont, where I grew up. My father was something of a hoarder. When I gravitated to Burlington, he sent his old Royal Portable with me, which I used to pound out poems in the apartment above Radio Beam. which is where I met a dashing young poet named Robert McKay, who used to type spontaneously for people at parties as a sort of Dadaist parlor game. Back then, the rent in Burlington wasn't suicidally high. The art scene in Burlington was a wild soup of creativity. I started a letterpress publishing cooperative to publish Robert's book, Cities of Rain, and applied for a table in the farmer's market, where we wrote poems for passersby as they shopped for vegetables and cheese. From there, I started touring to all the cities where my band had played and busking in the same spots. This is Royal Street in New Orleans. Soon, I was getting weird offers to appear at festivals, lucrative yet evil corporate gigs, and once a billionaire's wedding at a private island in the Adriatic, which I fumbled by asking for too much money. Sometimes people don't really believe that I could make a living doing this, and I think that's because so much deprivation and labor goes unseen. I sold over $10,000 worth of this chapbook I hand-sewed, for example. Even when my bank account was below zero, I was still only 3 book sales away from wining and dining myself. Niemand kann alles richtig machen, aber jeder etwas anderem. Diese Menschen haben schon mal angefangen. I have no idea what that means, only that a German newspaper called me a Weltverbesserer, or world betterer, which did wonders for my ego until I realized it has connotations of naive idealism too. I think I'm gonna run out of time with this slide, but this is Tom Stoppard, who asked me for a poem in New Orleans one time, and I did not recognize him or realize that he was still alive. I love sticking weird things in typewriters. This was for the former poet laureate Tracy K. Smith, who had just flown in for the Burlington Book Festival, and she could only pay in Korean won, which I rolled into my Olivetti and handed back to her, which is the moment I first fully realized poetry was a way I could move through the world. Sometimes poets just have to show their whole ass. This is a flyer I made for an erotic party in Brooklyn that hired me, which was pretty vanilla compared to the actual orgy in San Francisco, inside a former clock tower where I wrote poems for guests as they copulated freely all around me. No photos of that. Working in Europe can be difficult. I had to charm my way out of being arrested. In Spain, I ended up going to the Ayuntamiento, the city hall, and obtaining a literal poetic license. I would then have to show to the police as identification. This must be because poetry is dangerous. I wrote this while the Obama administration was bombing the Middle East. It's for a family on vacation who complained they hadn't seen a single ghost. If you want a ghost story, just turn on the news. There's no need to choreograph a pageantry of fear. Why fetishize the gore of a city's history when it's already on our hands? You want to be haunted? Okay, your taxes pay for the fleets of robots to rain death onto the children of the faraway villages you cannot pronounce right now, and now, and now, and now. This work also occasionally involves eternal boredom while I wait for passersby to approach. I type these avant-garde images I call text clouds, a palimpsest accumulated through hundreds of hours of waiting, watching, of failure and prayer when I'm left with truly nothing but memory to sustain me. My long-lost fiancée from Washington Square Park, she sent me a message later that night saying the poem had changed her DNA. Whenever I am alone or in darkness, I think of her words and remember poetry is not just a game for the upper middle class to play in universities, but a way of saving one another. And it's also a pair of wings.
Let's hear it for this incredible... That was pretty awesome. Well, we don't have any other. That's it. But what an amazing night. And while we're giving up applause, let us go ahead and give applause to our sponsors. And I'm going to have you, there we go, thanks. I don't bring my clicker. Mascoma Bank, Media Factory, Solidarity of Unbridled Labor in 7 days. Let's give it up. Our friends at the Media Factory, they're here, they're back there, they're recording all of this, they're going to take all this, edit it into an awesome presentation, and you can go on their website and download, take a look at tonight's, but you can go back, way back, and look at other ones and be inspired just the same. So thank you to the Media Factory, and thank you to these people. These are the folks that put this on for you. These are the people who work behind the scenes. It's all volunteer, and it's just about being passionate about having an opportunity for you to share your passion. So, thank you. Social media, there's a guy. And then for the last thing, if you want to present, watch presentations, get involved, or learn more, we've got this QR code, links to a link tree, and you can find out more information on our website and other resources about PechaKucha, how to participate, and how to celebrate. Thank you so much.